The Mystery Lady. I am sure this will be dismissed as total fiction, but I promise it is true. When I was 18, I had a friend who lived 20 miles away at Parkgate, Southampton. To get to and from there, I regularly used the train from Cosham to Swanwick. To get home on this particular Sunday evening, I arrived at 11 p.m. at Swanwick Station. It is a fairly remote and dingy station, and it was unusual for anybody else to be there at this hour. But a lady in her late 40s or early 50s was seated waiting for the last train. She was about 5'4" tall, of plump build, with permed hair, and was wearing a camel coat and carrying a very large canvas shopping bag, which had a tartan panel on it. I sat down to wait for the train, which were frequently late. After a few minutes, the lady asked if there was a train, as she had to get back to Portsmouth. I told her that I was also waiting for the same train, and that it should be along soon. Several times she asked the same question and reinforced that she must get back to Portsmouth. When the train eventually did arrive, she remained seated, but became very agitated and began to cry. I told her that this was the last train, but several times between sobs she repeated, "I can't go back, I can't go back." I asked if I could help and suggested that if she got on the train, that perhaps we could talk about any problems that she had. But again she said, "I can't go back." Meanwhile, the guard came over to point out to us that this was the last train of the night, and that if I was going to get on, I should hurry. From his angle, he probably couldn't see the lady. Reluctantly, I got on the train, and as it pulled out of the station, I saw her sobbing. On the journey home, I felt guilty about leaving her, and she was obviously very upset about something. And on arriving home at Cosham, I phoned the police at Parkgate and briefly related the story, and asked if perhaps somebody could visit the railway station and see if she was okay. I gave a description of her height and her dress, and the bag she was carrying. I assumed that perhaps some domestic dispute was the cause of her distress. On arriving home from work the next evening, the Monday, my mother drew my attention to an article in the local paper, the Evening News. She knew that I'd caught the train from Sandwich, and this article was appealing for witnesses to an accident near that station. I immediately recognised the photograph, included in the article as the lady from the previous evening. The description of her clothing and height and dress and bag also matched perfectly. The article was appealing for witnesses to an accident where the lady had been killed whilst walking along the railway lines on the Saturday evening. I telephoned the newspaper and suggested that they confused the dates, and that I'd spoken to the lady. They checked, and to my surprise insisted that the accident had been on the Saturday. I then telephoned the police, who listened to my story, and indeed confirmed that I'd reported the incident on the Sunday evening, however, were adamant that the incident had occurred on the Saturday. In a subsequent article in the local paper, I learned that the lady was called Maureen Hampton, and she was a patient in the local mental hospital, Cold East. And she'd been allowed out on the Saturday and had been to Portsmouth. Returning in the evening, she'd missed the station at Sandwich and got off the train at the next stop, Burlesdon. Not being familiar with the area, she decided to walk the short distance back to Swanwick along the lines and was struck by a train. Don't stay. This may sound silly, but at my previous address I believe we had ghosts who really didn't want us there. Firstly, there was always an atmosphere in my house. Sometimes my sister and I would be too frightened to look into the corner of our living room, and on some occasions we would cry about it. Yet we could never explain what was frightening us, and still can't. Also, my Nan's dog, before she died, kept sniffing in one corner of the room and looking into it, as though she was looking at someone. We had cold draughts whiz through a warm room and head towards the corner. We used to hear footsteps up the stairs. The kettle came on, and electric games started up by themselves. I used to feel someone or something sitting on my legs at the bottom of my bed, but when I felt around, there was nothing there. I dreaded bedtimes, as it made me feel physically ill at the thought of enduring another sleepless night, fearing what was going to happen. My mum tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was quite frightened too. One night, my sister, brother and I were home alone, as my mum had gone out for the evening with her friends. We decided to go and watch television in my room instead of staying downstairs, as we could hear footsteps and banging coming from upstairs. The quite prominent footsteps marched into my mum's room. The curtains were drawn, and it sounded like someone was typing on the computer keyboard. I thought Mum must be home, but it's late. Why was she on the computer? Anyway, the noises got so loud, and other footsteps were coming up the stairs, so we decided to go and check it out. Putting on a brave face, I went first, and everything in my mum's room, it was peaceful, yet the noises were still there. All three of us were terrified. We went back into my room and sat there crying hysterically, and then I really lost my temper. I'd been living with this fear for ages, and I wasn't having it passing on to my siblings. So I screamed as loud as I could, "For God's sake, leave us alone. We've never done anything to you, and you are frightening us. Go away." And then everything went still, peaceful even. Then for a good few months we were fine. No fear, just an oppressive atmosphere. But then the noises started again. We've since moved house, and I'm so very glad, as I was so miserable in my old house.